Great. Good morning again, everybody. Can you hear me? You can. So thank you for being back in time. We are late, but we had to take care of a technical problem so that the cameras now will be transmitting the live transmission of the event from now on until tomorrow evening. So this is great for everyone who has registered and will be following the event. Let me just tell you in the statistical side that for the physical registration, this registration has come up to 400 people that have registered for this event, and actually the organizers had to close down registration like 2 weeks earlier than planned because there was too much demand and the whole system would crash. And of course, following the event online is free and automatic. You don't even need to register, just log on to the links that have been provided. So we will now be starting the third session of this event under the title Knowledge Support for MSP. This is a session that will explore the scientific and traditional knowledge necessary to strengthen MSP, including the development of new tools and analysis. And for this, we have a fantastic panel. So this will be co-moderated by Ms. Catriona Nick Angusha from the Marine Institute in Ireland. Catriona, would you like to join me up here, please? And our rapporteur for this session is Ms. Karima Khalil from the Higher School of Technology of Essaouira, Qadia Yad University. Karima, please join us up here. And we have an array of excellent speakers. All of them except one will be present physically. So we have Mr. Pascal Toya from the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. Pascal, please join us. Welcome. We have Kira Guy from the Helmholtz Zentrum Herion in Germany. Kira, please join us up here. Thank you very much. We will have by connection Dan Hikuroa from the Waipapa Taumata Rao University of Auckland, New Zealand, National Commission for UNESCO. I don't even want to know what time it is in New Zealand right now that Dan will be connecting with us. We have physically present with us Andrei Abramic. Andrei, please join us from the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria in Spain. We have Nicolo Bassan from the UN Environment Programme. Nicolo, please take a seat. And last but not least, we have Tina Tillman from the Ministry of Environment in Finland. Where is Tina? Tina is here with us. So with this, I would like to open this third session and invite, before I invite anyone, you see the speakers, but let's go to the Slido thing. So has anyone used Slido before? Yes? Okay, for those that have or have not used it, let's do it now. Take out your phone, really, literally, as we speak. Take out your phone and connect to www.slido.com. I'm asking you to do it now because later on you will not remember how to connect when you will want to put on your questions. So you have to go to slido.com and it will ask you for a code. So you put this code, #, MSP Conference 2022. Just remember that. Maybe you want to take a picture of this as well so that you remember how to connect. This is where you will be able to post your questions. At the end of the session, the questions that have been most promoted by the public will be the ones that we will address to the speakers. So without any further delay from my part, I would like to invite my co-moderator, Catriona Nick Angusha, to take in her able hands this session. Catriona, please take my place here and I will disappear from your life. I will see you later on with the questions.
That's great. Thank you very much. And it's a great honor to be here today and to co-moderate this session. I'm really pleased to. I want to say a few words first about the event yesterday, the MSP Forum event we had yesterday. We explored a lot of the topics that are in the joint roadmap that you just heard the Commissioner talk about earlier on today. And this session is focusing on the knowledge support, which is a cross-cutting priority in the new MSP roadmap. So I have some very eminent colleagues here who are going to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to be strict on time. 5 minutes knowledge and information about their particular areas of interest. So we're looking at some data needs as part of this panel discussion. So what is the knowledge support cross-cutting priority in the new MSP plan? It aims to develop knowledge-based marine spatial planning, and through that's through data and evidence and decision support tools in the main. So that's what we discussed yesterday. And so just to give you a little bit of background to some of the outcomes of our discussions yesterday, we had a round table discussions debating some of the issues, these issues for knowledge-based marine spatial planning. So some of the topics that came up, I'd like to just give you a very brief summary of the recommendations and issues that were identified that were in our discussions. One of the questions that we debated was around the tools that are used for marine spatial planning processes and how well they are used. So we found out that most countries, with quite a wide representation of all countries, a lot of countries at the discussions, and most countries have some kind of geoportal. But there were issues that were identified in relation to this from that broad kind of integrative, cohesive perspective, and it relates to commonalities between different countries. So one of the there was two recommendations in particular on that discussion. The first one was around the need to share methodologies, that we need to have a mechanism how we can understand each other's methodologies for it. And the second recommendation, which comes up quite a bit across a lot of different areas relating to MSP implementation, was the creation of a network, a communications mechanism, so we could discuss things like our data standards and data coherence and terminology for data sets and things like that. So that was the first question. Another topic that we discussed was around the accessibility of knowledge from marine spatial planning. And for example, do planners and stakeholders have access to science and information to inform their processes? And it was felt that there was different levels of accessibility to the data. The first was professionals. They tend to have access to the requisite knowledge, and they generally have the training that's needed and so on, whereas stakeholders are generally more reliant on those professionals, and then the general public, there's a feeling that they don't have access to the relevant information. Another point that came up was around the access to indigenous or local knowledge, and that's often omitted from MSP processes across the world. So some of the recommendations in this discussion revolved around the acceptance of alternative forms of data, for example, citizen science or photographs and so on. And another recommendation from this group was that point that I touched on a few minutes ago around access to data through very simple geoportals is really important for people. Training is another aspect, and public consultation. That's another point that we felt is very important from the point of view of knowledge-based marine spatial planning. The final question I wanted to raise that was discussed yesterday was around the degree of science, policy and society interface in the MSP process. And we discussed that and what the ideal would be there. The science, policy, society interface, it's very complicated. You could spend weeks and months discussing this, and successfully translating knowledge across these domains is actually really difficult in practice. There's different stakeholders and they have very different needs. So some of the recommendations that came about from our discussion was that there really needs to be a mutual view on outcomes and implementations, and that's key. And there needs to be cooperation, and a multi-level cooperation, right from the decision makers right through to the general public, all stakeholders involved. Just one thing I wanted to point out. Yesterday, my co-chair on the IC's Working Group for Marine Planning and Coastal Zone Management gave a presentation on this very topic. It was a keynote presentation on knowledge support and marine spatial planning. And we, after our roundtable discussions, we discussed the outcome of these. And when you boil it down from knowledge support in marine spatial planning, there are recommendations that we can take from those learnings yesterday. And you can boil it down to 6 fundamental steps. Getting to know each other, networking, communications, events like this, getting to know each other's planning systems and our terminologies, sharing data and knowledge, that's key, identifying and solving common problems and issues, and sharing, learning and continued collaboration, working together in projects and so on, making sure that we collaborate. And finally, if it's suitable, institutionalisation. And what we mean by that was, developing working groups for marine spatial planning data, for example. So I'll leave it there. That's my 5 minutes, and I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues. And I'll sit down here for a moment so I can give them the floor. Okay. Can you hear me okay? And this one too. Okay, great. Okay, first up we have Pascal Toya. So Pascal is a research scientist. You can come up here to the podium. Thanks, Pascal. He's a research scientist at the Kenya Marine and Fisheries Research Institute. He holds a master's degree in marine spatial planning and a PhD in marine ecosystem management. His PhD research was on achieving a sustainable blue economy in the Indian Ocean, and he focused on the fisheries sector in that. He's currently working on research activities that relate to marine spatial planning and the blue economy in the Western Indian Ocean. And he's part of a team who's developing the marine spatial plan for the Kenyan Exclusive Economic Zone. So, Pascal, the floor is over to you. So 5 minutes on natural scientific knowledge necessary to strengthen marine spatial planning. Thanks, Pascal.
Hi, everyone. That was a good introduction. That's me, yes. I'm going to talk about natural scientific knowledge necessary to strengthen MSP. It's a wide topic, 5 minutes. I'm not sure I'm going to do justice to it. But so when we talk about why natural scientific knowledge for marine spatial planning. I'm going to talk with a bias of my region, Africa. For Africa especially, marine spatial planning is being supported as a tool that is going to enhance sustainable blue economy. Everyone is looking at to the ocean for development. Most of the blue economy sectors are dependent on natural capital. So it's for us to enable the blue economy sectors, we need good natural scientific data for that. Here is a figure that I've lifted from AU about report that was looking at the blue economy sectors and the projection up to 2063. As you can see that the sectors that are seen to have a good potential for the region are those that are dependent on natural capital. Things to do with coastal tourism, fisheries, blue carbon markets, etc. So if we need to expand these sectors, these blue economy sectors, which are dependent on natural capital, obviously natural capital, knowledge of natural capital is also required. Unfortunately, as you can see from this, the investment that is going towards research and education, which is the biggest tool for the generation of natural scientific knowledge, is almost lacking. So this is a big problem. On one hand, we are expecting that we are going to develop based on this industry that are dependent on natural capital. On the other hand, we don't want to invest in scientific knowledge. How is this going to happen? So marine spatial planning is dependent on this natural scientific knowledge for many things. The needs for us to achieve good environmental status, we can't do this if we don't have the natural scientific data. Also, if we want to have the MSP knowledge so that we can protect the areas that are of more natural importance, we need this scientific knowledge. Unfortunately, now we also, there is a combination of other challenges, including climate change and overexploitation, that are adding an additional layer to the challenges that are already existing. So for us to make a significant or to make a good marine spatial planning, all this information is required. So we can't run away from getting good natural information if we have to do marine spatial planning. What I'm just projected is an example from the work that I did on this distribution of species in the region. One of the challenges that we got from my PhD work that I'm showing here, this is just distribution of big fish species and interaction with the fishing activities, which was supposed to inform marine spatial planning in the region, is the lack of data. That was very challenging. But as much as we have challenges, there are other opportunities that we can use, or the opportunity we can take advantage of in order to enhance this natural scientific knowledge. This includes the use of modern technology such as remote sensing. We should also there is availability of data out there, but sometimes the people who are in possession of this data are not willing to share. So if you put in potential policies that enable us to share data freely among organizations, then we'll be able to utilize them for marine spatial planning. Also to improve modeling techniques that can effectively be able to cover the gaps on the temporal and the spatial gaps that are existing in many parts of the region. I hope I have utilized my 5 minutes, and maybe we'll have more to discuss during the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pascal. We'll save questions until we've heard from all our panelists. So I'm going to move straight on to Kira. So Kira is going to touch on the social science side of things. So Dr. Kira Guy, she has over 20 years experience working in the field of ICZM and marine spatial planning, and she primarily works in the Baltic and the North Sea and the European Atlantic areas. She's been involved in numerous marine spatial planning projects in the Baltic Sea Plan, Participate, Pan-Baltic Scope, for example, and has co-authored a number of guiding documents on marine spatial planning. Her academic work at Helmholtz-Zentrum Heron focuses on perceptions and values related to the sea, cultural ecosystem services and coastal fisheries. Through SPRO, she is currently advising to the Maritime project in Namibia. She's also a member of the Marine Spatial Planning team and the Scientific Advisory Board at the Federal Maritime and Hydrographic Agency in Germany. So I'll pass over the floor to you, please, Kira.
Thanks, Katrina. That's taken up at least 5 minutes already, it feels like. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. And it feels a bit like a science slam, actually, to try and do social science in 5 minutes, which is a big challenge. But I'll do my best to convince you that social sciences are, in fact, very important for MSP. And I want to start by saying that we often use this term social science, I think, to cover pretty much anything that isn't natural science, when in fact it is a very broad field of many different disciplines, all of which deal with humans effectively and how we as humans behave both individually and in groups and within society. So it's how we think, how we relate to the sea, what we do in the sea. And so some of the classic social science subjects are economics, for example, but planning. Planning is a social science. But I want to also say that social sciences, I think, should also include the humanities, so arts, also literature, for example. So anything that really explains how we as humans relate to the sea. The human side of MSP is very crucial because it gives us an indication of why we actually plan. Why do we do it in the first place? How we plan, with whom we plan, and what the challenges and enablers might be to enable us to come up with a good plan, one that's effective and one that delivers on our key objectives. And the social sciences also are different because they require a very diverse set of skills, much like the natural sciences, of course. There's qualitative, quantitative input, there's all sorts of different spatial and relational knowledge that social sciences can contribute. So let me give you some examples of where the relevance actually lies. So the first one is people and the sea. And you see the bubble in the middle, that's meant to be us as individuals, but also as groups. And it's really about how do we even perceive our planning space? How do we relate to the nature that is in the ocean? And how are we behaving and influencing that space and that environment. It's really also looking at the values that we all hold, the beliefs that we believe are important when it comes to managing the sea, when it comes to defining a future for our seas. And that then also leads to the questions of trade-offs, and the social sciences can help with all these questions. How do we make decisions? How do we decide what's more important if we have to make a choice for the future of the sea? Then there's also a kind of broader perspective, if we zoom out a little bit and look at the level of society as a whole. So here we have the social sciences to help us understand laws and regulations, our institutions that govern the sea, the groups, the interactions, the many interests that are involved in making use of the sea, and also who are maybe the marginal, the vulnerable groups that perhaps we don't focus on so much. It's about the social relations, also the history of seafaring, for example. We heard earlier the importance of the port of Barcelona, for example, in the past, and how perceptions of that port have changed. So it's that time element that social sciences can also help us understand. Conflicts, already mentioned, power relations, very important. You know, some groups perhaps are stronger, more powerful than others. And last not least, a very important question that's becoming more important, I believe, is to how do we even achieve a fair distribution or justice within MSP so that everybody benefits to the best possibility from how we use the sea. And then there's also the process, the planning process. And again, social sciences are very useful when it comes to designing processes, understanding a good stakeholder process, participation, all these key words that you see on the slides, like transformation, learning, communication, Katrina mentioned a minute ago, and also transdisciplinary approaches. How do we actually work together effectively in plan making, in drawing up plans and then implementing them and also evaluating them? I'm sure I've talked for more than 5 minutes, but anyway, the last slide is really trying to summarize my key message, which is, of course, that we can't actually do MSP without social science and humanities knowledge. I believe it's very important to use social sciences to critically reflect on what we are doing and who we are benefiting and what we can maybe do better, both in terms of the outcomes of a plan and in terms of the process of getting to a plan. I believe social sciences is essential also for thinking about sustainable development as a whole, and also to draw up more transdisciplinary processes of co-design, for example, to bring together groups, different groups, diverse groups, to talk to one another. There is a caveat in that quantitative or also qualitative approaches mostly can be quite tricky, they can be time-consuming, they can be resource-intensive, but nonetheless, social sciences, my last sentence, are also very important, I believe, when it comes to evaluating MSP, how far we have come. And that's important in the current context, I believe, where many countries have drawn up their plans, are implementing them, and now it's time to think, well, how have we done? What are these plans delivering? And again, social sciences is the answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ciara. That was great. So now we're going to move all the way across the world to New Zealand, and hopefully we have Dan Hikuroa online. Dan, we can see you. Can you hear us okay? Hello, Dan. Welcome to Barcelona. Bonjour. So Dan Hikuroa. So just to give you a little background to Dan, is the sound okay? Yeah. Okay. Great. So Dan Hikuroa, he employs earth systems and environmental humanities approaches in his work at the University of Auckland, and he's an established world expert on weaving Indigenous knowledge and science to realise the dreams of the communities he works with. Dan is an UNESCO New Zealand Culture Commissioner. He's an AGU Council member, and he has key roles within New Zealand's science research sector, and is reimagining relationships with water and the oceans. Dan is spearheading alternative ways of assessing sustainability, including weaving the Indigenous knowledge he has and, apologies, I've just lost my place. Weaving it into the science and into legislation and assessment framework and decision support tools. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation, Dan. So it's over to you.
Well, kia ora, Catriona, o te rā, koutou katoa, ngā mihi, o te pō, kia koutou katoa, mai Aotearoa. Just greetings to you all from New Zealand. It's about 11:30 in the evening. So I'm hoping my PowerPoint will come up now. Great. Could we jump on to the next slide, please? Awesome. So as the title says, Indigenous knowledge and how we might use it in marine spatial planning. If we go to the next slide, I think there might be, here we are. So some of you have clearly had some interactions with Indigenous knowledge based on, at least from the previous speakers we've had just in this session alone. Importantly, what I think Indigenous knowledge brings, which is different to science, and I trained as a scientist, is that it actually brings in culture, it brings in values, and it brings in worldviews. And so therefore, it brings additional things that maybe are different to those things we have typically used in marine spatial planning in the past. And I think a key point I want to make here is that understanding what worldview is really important when it comes to marine spatial planning. And I really pick up on our previous speakers' points around how we do things is really important, and the way we try and understand different values and worldviews is critical. Now, worldviews underpin, what we believe to be real, what we believe to be unreal, what we believe to be possible, what we believe to be impossible. And so if we have a look at this image here, it's a little bit hard to be interactive. I'm on the other side of the world at the moment, but if I was to ask you, what do we see here? I'm hoping, because it's a marine crowd, that we might recognize a humpback whale. Some of you might recognize that it's kind of not quite adult, but it's not juvenile, it's kind of somewhere in between. Yet other people would look at that and they would see an ancestor. Other people might look at that and they might see a food source. And so the important thing there is that it's the different worldviews which have us looking at that thing differently. Importantly, though, we're not trying to say who's right and who's wrong when it comes to worldview. We're just trying to say we're looking at the same thing and thinking about it differently. And the ocean is no different. Now, let's have a look at what we've done in marine spatial planning in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We have managed to integrate Indigenous knowledge in that process. There's a whole lot of Māori terms in there. And not only does it include Māori knowledge, it includes Māori ways of making sense of the world, ways of knowing and being and doing. And this is maybe something that we could share with other people around the world. One of the important things there was that we framed it in terms of restoring the life force to the ocean. And interestingly, I think one of the important points that came up is that the stakeholder working group that was compiled to undertake this marine spatial planning was asked to be the voice of the Gulf. Now, that's quite an interesting prospect because, of course, in New Zealand, we actually given legal personality, legal rights to rivers, to mountains, to forests. And so maybe when we could start thinking about marine spatial planning, maybe we could think about it in that framing. In our planning, how do we deliver the voice of the Gulf? Now, if we go to our final slide, I think I had one more slide in there. Here we are. Thank you so much. There it is. This is a knowledge evidence tracking platform that we developed with our Environmental Protection Authority in New Zealand, because we recognised that when we're trying to do marine spatial planning, we want reliable knowledge. Now, in the past, that's usually just been science, but what we're discovering is that much Indigenous knowledge can be just as reliable. And typically, it brings an accuracy that sometimes science doesn't bring. Where science can give us really good precision, we may not get the accuracy. The challenge is trying to understand that knowledge from within the worldview from which it's come. And often that knowledge is codified in ways which make it difficult to access if we try and understand it through a science lens. So this framework was developed to try and understand and determine veracity of knowledge, of Indigenous knowledge, as evidence. And I believe this is one of the tools that we can start to use when we start to try and co-govern and co-design and start to bring together all the knowledge, because I think in trying to do marine spatial planning, it's our responsibility to draw from all the knowledge that we have at our fingertips, not just particular types of knowledge. And I think I'll just stop there, Catriona. I think it's about 5 minutes. Kia ora.
Thank you, Dan. Yep, perfect. That's been very interesting. Kind of the last few speakers have spoken about knowledge and the types of knowledge: natural science, social science, Indigenous knowledge. So I think actually the way you finished up there, Dan, and you spoke about the platforms for knowledge and using them for evidence, and so I think it's a nice segue into our next presentation from Andre, who is going to talk about the platforms. I'll pass you over to here, Andre. So just to introduce you to Andre, he holds a position at the moment at the Eco Aqua Institute in the University of Las Palmas, and he's working on a number of projects as principal investigator, coordinator and a researcher. And the projects generally deal with areas of marine environmental monitoring and assessment, marine spatial planning, and applied data management. Previous to that, he worked at the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission in Italy, the Polytechnic University of Valencia in Spain, and in the University of Campinas in Brazil. He also has experience in the private sector. Since 2020, he is co-chair of the Technical Expert Group on Marine Spatial Planning Data that was established by DG Mare of the European Commission. So he has some insights into the MSP data management and data sharing and harmonization. So I pass over to you now, Andre. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this nice introduction, and I would like to also thank the organizer for having me here and have an opportunity to present the potential of the European MSP data layer. So within these first 10 years of work on the projects on the maritime spatial planning and starting developing the MSP process on the national level, we find out that we actually need to develop these processes. We need to understand what is the status of the coastal and marine environment, what is the status of the conservation, what are the characteristics of oceanographic parameters and how it is related to climate change, and what are the potential conflicts within the land use, coastal activities, and the maritime activities. What is the socioeconomic situation, how will we apply within the plan, and who has competence within the development of the area which we are planning in the sectors. All this data, actually, we need to develop the plan. We need to develop a number of the analyses that will provide information that we make a decision where to actually put the aquaculture, where to put the offshore wind farm. So for that, we need to actually do the data collection, and everybody who is working on the data collection now, how this is a very difficult process, as we have issue with the no standardized and no harmonized data. So we talk about this, lots about this input data which is not harmonized, but when we start to put the question, what about the maritime spatial plans? Should they be harmonized? We posed this question in 2019, and we said, okay, when the European plans will be developed, we'll be able to put them together. We'll be able to see if their activities are coherent within the planning. So this question was given to develop the group who was established in 2020. It's a technical expert group, practically to develop this solution for the development of the European harmonized maritime spatial plan. So in 2020, actually, there was available two solutions, operational solution. First one was the base map, which was developed for the Baltic, and where you can see the maritime spatial planning within the Baltic. It was developed on the core of the INSPIRE model, And the second one was developed with the MSP project. It was called MSP Inspired Data Model. Both models, both standards were quite good, and it was difficult to understand which one we should use for the development of the European standard. So actually, solution come within the technical expert group together with the team of the embedded human activities, and actually it was developed hybrid model. The hybrid model practically starts and based on the MSP Inspired Data Model, includes all the things what actually didn't have MSP Inspired Data Model, but includes the base maps model. And then we had, on top of it, MNet operational attributes. So within this way how we did it, this solution, practically, if the plans were developed previously with the base map, they can easily be included in the hybrid model, or other way around within the MSP Inspired Data Model, everything can be actually introduced in the hybrid model. So this is practically included in the recommendation which actually Technical Expert Group provided last year. It's about developing and harmonizing this European MSP data layer, where you can actually find more information about these three models. So development of the European MSP data layer started the last year. Now, if we go to the embedded human activities, you can find the plans of the Belgium, Germany, Denmark, Poland, Latvia, Sweden, and Finland. They all follow the same data model. They all follow the same standard. So we are able practically to see which countries actually designated area for the fisheries. What is the coherence? Is there any coherence within the maritime transport? What is the area designated for the offshore wind farms, for the conservation, or any other type of the activity? So this is, I believe, quite big success for MSP community. It's it's a big success for the MSP community. But it's not just that we can download this data and we can actually have it for us, that we can analyze it and analyze within the plans and reuse it. The second thing, what it's very important that we are seeing, it's replicability of the analysis. And this means that any analysis which is based on MSP data standard can be easily replicable on the data set which is following that standard, even this being on the local, national level, regional level, or even on the European level. So just to explain, I know that this is not simple to understand. We actually developed in 2019 MSP Inspired Data Model, and for it, symbology, which is style layer descriptor. So for this MSP data model, MSP Inspired Data Model, we applied for the Madeira, who had the plan in 2019, and we actually applied for the Canary Islands for the current activities. So this symbology, which we developed 2 years ago, we said, why? 1 week ago, we said, why we shouldn't put it on the European MSP data layer for these countries which are shared? Because we are following the same model. So we get to this. We actually needed about half an hour to do it. It's because we are following the standard. It was not complicated. It is a quite good work. It's not something that we would like to show here, the symbology that was developed by Spanish Institute of Oceanography, because this is a quite difficult task, because you have lots of activities overlapped and you have lots of multi-use, so it's difficult to show it. But idea is to show how, if we following the standards, then we can actually provide, then we can actually have it, if we are following the standard, that we can actually reuse the tools and application within the different plans. So this was the concept that we actually, just a second. This is the concept that we actually applied when we make a proposal for the REMAP project, which will be co-financed by European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund. We are actually having the kickoff in Las Palmas next month. The project will last 3 years. We have 8 partners, 3 use cases, and we are developing innovative technical framework for the support of the European MSP process. So we are practically developing modular, simplified analysis. Of course, they are going to be based on the standard. And these standards, these 11 analyses that we are going to develop, will be easily replicable on any maritime special plan that will be applied the standard for the maritime special plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Andre. So next up, we're going to talk about ocean observations and how they can be a tool for marine spatial planning. So I'd like to invite Nicola Bassan up to the podium here. Nicola is a multidisciplinary ocean expert and he holds an MSc in marine spatial planning. His work focuses mainly on marine policy, sustainable blue economy, ocean literacy and ocean observations and natural resource management. He's been working in planning and management of marine and coastal areas through the involvement of numerous EU-funded projects and international consultancies and technical support to national authorities. He's also organised various events, training and workshops on marine-centred topics. So I will pass over the floor to you, Nicolo, and I look forward to hearing your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be in this panel. I'll try to give a quick overview of ocean observations. Of course, much of the things I'll say are already known to you. In 5 minutes, this is pretty difficult, but I'll try to do this. Well, first of all, greetings also from my divisional director in UNEP, Jean-Loup, and from all the colleagues in Nairobi. We all know that there are, of course, 3 interconnected planetary crises we're currently facing, which are climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, and how these have direct and detrimental impacts on our ocean and coasts. And so how also ocean observation and long-term, I would say, ocean observation are essential to understand the different impacts that our ocean and coasts are facing. And ocean information, of course, supports good policy and provides an evidence for real-time also decision-making processes. And sustained ocean observation are crucial, actually, to track, understand the complex and vast oceanic environment, providing data, products, and services to actually underpin a knowledge-driven society. Of course, as you can see here, there's one of the old Gulf Stream charts, and today, together, thanks to improvements in ocean observations and modern monitoring in general, we passed from this first Gulf chart to this actually chart of the Gulf Stream. So we have at our hands tools and information, knowledge then to inform almost real-time planning and management of our coasts and seas. Of course, this needs to be prioritized, and in terms of ocean observation, we need to rely on essential ocean variables. These were, of course, compilated and are currently compilated by the Global Ocean Observing System. And we can see that they're mainly variables based on physics, biochemistry, biology and ecosystems, and cross-disciplinary, which include ocean color, marine debris, and ocean sound. On the right side, you can see a beautiful algal bloom, even if we know the detrimental impacts of that. But this is mainly through, of course, remote sensing in this case, and in situ observations. Within UNEP, but in partnership with many international institutions, we're implementing the Global Environment Monitoring System for the Ocean and Coasts program, GEMS Ocean, to be short. We identified 3 main problems because we know there are many observing systems out there. There's much data out there, but needs to be prioritized and synthesized to feed into the policymaking worldwide. And so the first problem was that there are many observing systems and monitoring systems, but they're very fragmented and dispersed. And so the first goal would be to promote and convene a transdisciplinary partnership approach, focusing on sustainable coastal and ocean use and ecosystem health. Second problem was that many small island developing states and developing countries don't have resources or capacity to undertake effective monitoring and observation, at least at a sustained fashion. And so the second goal would be to strengthen this capacity development, especially on SIDS and developing countries, on ocean monitoring. And the third problem is that we have already much information and data. We talk many times of data overload. And so we need to synthesize this data and also make it accessible, easily accessible and interpretable by non-experts. So the third goal would be to provide access to the use of quality-assured, interoperable, open environmental data, analysis and sets of indicators to governments and stakeholders worldwide. To date, the core partnership, it's made up of the following institutions. Of course, it's a co-design process that we're following, and we invite different institutions and experts to join us in this endeavor. But of course, we are also supporting different Ocean Decade initiatives. We were actually recognized as an official UN Ocean Decade program, and we are supporting the Decade Ocean Prediction Collaborative Center, which is headed by Mercator Ocean International, and different initiatives which also tend to have a digital twin of the ocean in order to have a digital tool that could support policymaking almost at real time and provide fit-for-purpose information for policymaking. In this case, you can see one of the first tools that was developed by Mercator Ocean International, where you can see the beat or breathing of the Arctic ice in this case. It's focusing mostly on remote sensing and the remote observations, but the scope is to have a 3D digital tool to have in which all the biological information and the knowledge can be assessed by stakeholders worldwide. And can help in observing also and monitoring the effects of human activities at a global scale. I'll end it up here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicolo. That's a lovely slide there showing the beating there in the Antarctic. Okay, so next up, next up is Tina Tillman, and Tina is going to talk to us about scenario building as a tool for marine spatial planning. So I suppose it's about using that knowledge that we've just talked about and presented, and how that can be used for informing marine spatial planning through scenarios and using the Finnish experience. So Tina is a ministry advisor at the Finnish Ministry of the Environment, and she's in charge of marine spatial planning and coastal zone management there. She's a member of the EU Member State Expert Group on Marine Spatial Planning. She's co-vice chair of the Baltic Sea Helcom Vasab MSP Working Group and a member of the Secretariat of the Finnish Island Committee. Tina is a planning geographer from the Helsinki University, and she has specialised in coastal spatial planning. Prior to the ministry, she worked in Helsinki Uusimaa Regional Council and Uusimaa Regional Environmental Centre, mainly with coastal development and nature conservation tasks, and in association with Finnish municipalities with land use planning and development questions. So over to you, Tina. Pass to Tina. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm here because Finland used this scenario building method in drafting MSP, I start to describe a bit scenarios. I must change myself this. Why scenarios? Okay. So what actually scenarios are, and here is a short description of that. They are holistic descriptions of possible and alternative future operating environments. So what might happen, what events might happen in the future. And on backgrounds, there are a lot of knowledge of global, international, EU, national changes, so they form a kind of background basis for MSP, a kind of environment for MSP. And you can test with scenarios, you can test against scenarios your own policies. You can evaluate if my own policies are coming right or wrong or should be renewed. And also the scenario process itself is a good way to facilitate multidisciplinary discussions between different stakeholders and tackle very complex issues which occurs on the coast. And And these are the scenarios which we developed in the beginning of the process. They are really very different, but they form a background for our discussions. There are three, and the one is dancing with big businesses, and in that scenario, Baltic Sea is a source for energy and minerals. And scenario 2 is under the environment terms. It's a scenario where recreation is and tourism is really flourishing, and people are living quite back to nature life, self-service. Okay, and then the third one is sea of restrictions and tensions, and there the Baltic Sea comes. All activities comes very restricted on the Baltic Sea, and we started discussions with stakeholders with these three scenarios, so they form a discussion basis. And to be honest, it was not so easy, because these are quite exaggerated, these scenarios, and people didn't want to discuss what if there comes restrictions to the Baltic Sea, and they didn't want to see, they wanted to select one scenario, but it's not possible. You have to discuss all these scenarios. And what we have now seen is that when COVID-19 came, it was kind of black swan. People wanted to live on their holiday houses and stay there. So the green scenario suddenly came true. And now when there is a war, now we are on the scenario 3. But we didn't have a clue of all of these two big issues. But stakeholders were actually a little bit forced to discuss that what if this still happens, what would you do with in their own field? And we had really many workshops, and stakeholders had to draw maps of all three scenarios. This is the Gulf of Finland, and this is a picture of scenario 3, where there are restrictions on the Baltic Sea, and you can see that the blue circle is wind energy. It can exist only on the west part of the Gulf of Finland. And then they had to draw same kind of map from scenario 2 and scenario 1. And after discussions, they had to think that all of these scenarios and discuss with each other, and then they had to decide. They had to decide how how to prepare with their own sector to the future. What kind of areas they have to reserve in any case. So these scenarios were a good discussion basis, and it's better to start discussions with the different scenarios than ask stakeholders what are your interests. So everybody stays on their views, but in this case they have to listen all the other views and come to the solution of that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tina. That was really insightful. Okay, I have time for a couple of questions for the panel. So I have a couple of questions myself to pose to you before I pass over to the Slido. So I'm going to open the floor to any of you to answer this for this question. It's clear that there's really a lot of useful information and science and knowledge available to marine spatial planning. And not only just marine spatial planning, to those wider objectives of the UN Decade of Ocean Science. However, the science, the policy drivers, sustainable development, those planning objectives, and all the stakeholder needs, they really need to be balanced. So you've all spoken about challenges that are there, and issues and so on. And my question to the panel is: how do we prioritise this? How do we actually prioritise activities and so on using that information? It's quite a tricky question, but I'm hoping you might have some insights for the audience here. So who'd like to take that question up?
Well, thanks first of all. The prioritization, from my point of view, it's based on a case by case in terms of knowledge and information, also in terms of regional differences and worldwide differences in terms of data and information availability. So I wouldn't say there's a common answer for this, so a common priority to focus on. Of course, the stakeholder involvement in terms also of data acquisition, it's fundamental. We've seen the indigenous knowledge from our colleague, how important also incorporating that social part, as Kira was mentioning. So I wouldn't say there's a unique answer in terms of prioritization. There's the need of being openly available in of course, sharing and discussing the availability of data. I would say like this.
That's a fair point. Anyone else want to jump in on that question?
It works. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. That's the $3 million question, really, in a way. How do we prioritize in a way that makes sense? I would say that primarily the question of priorities is a social question. It's really down to societies, and I agree, Nicola, that it isn't the same answer for every community, for every MSP process. But that decision, which priorities should be made, needs to be underpinned by good science. We need to have good knowledge of the marine environment, first of all, but we also need to have good knowledge on why perhaps particular sectors are needed for economic reasons, for social reasons, and how we can maybe achieve distributive benefits. What's the right mix maybe for a particular country or region? So I think really the two go hand in hand, but the decision on what we then choose ultimately is a social question, and it depends very much on who then sits around that table and how we can make sure that this process is as inclusive also of different values and different worldviews as possible.
Thank you, Hira. Before I come back to the panel here, I just don't want to forget about Dan in New Zealand, because it's almost bedtime, I imagine. Dan, would you like to come in on that point about prioritising the types of information and the activities based on the information?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity, Catriona. I think I would just reiterate a point I made in my presentation, that when we shifted the focus to the body of water itself, when the people making decisions on the plan had to be the voice of the Gulf, suddenly new realities were imagined. And I think that's maybe one framing we could use to think about the priorities. Absolutely right. It's societies making the judgments, but if we can make them on behalf of our oceans, that's certainly a good learning we had here in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Thank you, Dan. Does anyone else want to come in on that question? No, I think they were useful points. The next question that I have is in relation to the MSP stakeholder community and policymakers and our decision makers and so on. I actually question sometimes whether they necessarily need access to the data. It's the interpretation of that data. It's data products that they need. So how do you, as data generators and data owners and data managers and so on, how do you actually translate that information into useful products or knowledge to inform the process? Is there a way to do that?
Okay. I think what you said, I think in your introduction, that it's very important, the development of GeoViewers and GeoPortals. Also, I would say, it's not just for the expert. When we open our data, everybody can download it, and the tools are in this moment are quite easy to use. It's not, you don't have to be expert to use it, practically GIS. Also, I think that that sharing the data within the EMODnet, within the Copernicus, which are providing the products, collecting the data from different data providers and harmonizing them and then providing them in their portals, are actually also providing very accessible kind of the very complex products like that coming from the space Earth observations, which are actually accessible to anyone. No?
Thanks, Andre. Do you want to come in as well there, Pascal?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's unfortunate that MSP is still recent, because we have all this data that has been collected for like decades, but when people were collecting this data, most of the time it was not focused on MSP. So we have a bunch of data, but then again, the format that is in cannot be really perhaps usable for MSP. There is a lot that can be done to try to transform it into more usable formats. So going forward, countries should be motivating the data collectors and data generators to have a more MSP focus when they're trying to do their data collection exercise.
That's a good point. I know from my perspective, data reuse is a key thing for marine spatial planning, and it's not necessarily about generating new data. It's reusing what's already there, and the principle of best available data, using that. So that data quality is key from my perspective as well, and implementing standards and ensuring data governance is in place. So anyone else want to come in on that point?
Seem to be doing a lot of talking, but I just wanted to make the point that data interpretation is also a very, very important task, and it's not neutral. It's not just automatically something that then pops into, this information that is accepted by everyone. So that data interpretation is also, I believe, a social process, and we need to be mindful, I believe, and create platforms or ways of actually sharing that interpretation task so that the outcome is actually usable for MSP and that we understand who has interpreted data in what way.
Thanks, Kira. Dan, is there anything you want to come in with there? Just I'm conscious of you on the screen.
Yeah, kia ora, thanks. Yeah, once again, I think a couple of quick points. What we've discovered here at UNESCO in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I think elsewhere, is the importance of trusted knowledge, particularly in this era of misinformation and disinformation, and in alignment with the International Decade of Indigenous Languages. What we've had to do here is to make sure that the data and the knowledge gets presented in certain ways that make sense to different communities, and also by people whom those communities trust. So that would be what I have to offer for that great question.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, does anyone else want to come in on that point? No. Okay, so I think I will wrap up the panel discussion. So at that point, catches my eye the logo behind us here for the MSP global, and it's a network, and you can see the pieces of the pie. And the way I see it is that those pieces of pie are those data sets, and trying to integrate them and develop some kind of coherence around them to filter that information down to something useful for marine spatial planning, and based on knowledge, and generating that knowledge is the key to it. So it's about that integration and that developing that network, and there's a lot of work, and it's an ongoing, evolving process. So I look forward to hearing more as we implement this MSP roadmap. So I'm going to pass over now to Sergio.
Thank you. Thank you, Katriona. Can we shift now to the Slido questions and see if we have any questions that we might want to answer from our experts? All right, so we have 3 questions. Two are general and one is for Tina. So let's take 1 or 2 minutes for each one of them. What is social justice in MSP for you? That's an easy one. Who would like to speak about social justice? I think that I saw Kira making a face, so Kira, you might want to go first. If you make faces, I'll just ask you to speak.
Okay, no, I wasn't making faces, but that, of course, is, well, it's a difficult question to answer.
Exactly.
Obviously, of course. I think there are different ways of tackling the justice question, and it might be worth thinking about dividing this notion of justice into different dimensions, I suppose, which can then be related back also to different times of the MSP process or different stages of the MSP process. So one way of thinking about it is to think about the distribution element of MSP, because it is about allocating goods and benefits, but also disadvantages to some. So that really looks more at the outcome of a plan. But then there's also questions of representation, so who's actually involved in the process, who's being heard, and a question of recognition. So that is really not so much, who is involved or the breadth of stakeholders, but who is heard in the MSP process, who is officially recognized, for example, with a mandate in legislation. How are we treating our different groups, our different stakeholders? So these are maybe some dimensions that can help us think a little more specifically about what justice might mean. But I think the justice question, of course, is a huge one, and there's no easy answer to it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I appreciate this answer, because I think it's very relevant, and it is a matter of social justice as well as inclusion, as we heard from many, and also a matter also of including the points of view of stakeholders. Let's go. Does somebody else want to come to this point about social justice in MSP? Rather not. Okay. How can we make Oceanside? Oh, no, let me answer the first question. Will this morning's slides be available, if any, and the conference be recorded? The slides will be available. And I'm not sure about the recording. Will we have it? And recording will be available online. So thank you for asking this and the clarification. Second question is how we can make ocean science and knowledge more policy relevant, which I find a very interesting question, being a former politician myself. So who would like to take this to make it more relevant? Yes, Nicolo, please.
I can take this. Well, I would say very in a simple reply. I would say it's in communication, in actually trying to translate scientific knowledge to policymakers in a proper way. Besides, of course, the involvement of also underrepresented parts, and then trying to bring the social part in it, I feel it's all a matter of translating scientific knowledge to politicians in general. It's a very tricky part. Another component could be also lobbying, actually, and it should be lobbying. So the scientific community should maybe step out from its comfort zone and dive deep in the political mud, let's say, and push its knowledge. I would say I feel these could be the main tools. Of course, political will is essential in this, but from a scientific point of view, we can get better in providing knowledge and support for policymaking.
Nicolo, thank you very much. That's very, very relevant and interesting. Let me go across the oceans here to Dan and ask you, Dan, about the way that we can make this type of information knowledge that you shared with us, which is based also on local knowledge and tradition, everything, also relevant to policy making and to politicians. Because that's equally important, I think, to scientific and measurements and so knowledge. And very often it's like the poor relative, let's say. So how can we go about this?
Yeah, kia ora. What we've learned here in New Zealand is we needed to demonstrate the accuracy and the precision and the reliability of the Indigenous knowledge, so that policy writers and politicians could have confidence to make decisions based on that knowledge. Now that's important because much of the Indigenous knowledge is codified in different ways, codified in myth and in legend, but we can demonstrably show that behind that, that knowledge that often has been generated consistent with the scientific method is empirical based data. And that's what we need to get back to. And that's the information we need to use to share with policy writers, policy generators, and of course, politicians.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much. I'll jump to this question for Tina, but connected to what we have at hand here, because there is a question that says, what kind of stakeholders were consulted about scenarios, economic sectors, if so, and so on. It's getting a bit detailed, but I want to connect it to the previous question, because actually involving stakeholders in the process of the scenarios that you described is, in a way, translating information towards policy making, right? So would you like to comment on the possibly two questions at once? I don't think you need to do anything. The control does it.
Okay. Yes. Yes, thank you for the question. All were invited in the workshops from national level, from ministries to local level to individual fishermen. So everybody who wanted to take part to the workshops, it was possible. And first in the beginning, we had 8 workshops. And finally, the amount of participants, it just growed when we went further. So we had those all over the coastline. So to your question about the information, so we did get a lot of information from the local stakeholders. And I feel that, well, if I go back to the still the question about were some sectors more important than others. So it was really important that all participants was treated equally. So they were listened, and there was no more important sectors or more important stakeholders. All were equal, and this is really important to have a good and productive workshop. And then back to the knowledge, we did get a lot of knowledge because the stakeholders, they have local knowledge and they are representatives of their sectors. So there was a lot of knowledge in the workshops all the time. And yes.
Super. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tina. Now, our rapporteur, Karima Khalil, has been working very hard throughout this process, taking notes and everything. So I would not want to eat away from her time to give us a report. And I think that we'll have to wrap it up with the questions here. The questions will be available as well. But I think it would be time now, according to our program, to invite Karima to the floor, to the podium, to give us her short report in 5 minutes from the work that she has been doing during this process. So Karima, please join me up here. And give a hand to Karima for having done it.
Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to report this session, which the topic is knowledge support for marine spatial planning, which the topic is very relevant within the context of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. The objective is to explore the scientific and traditional knowledge necessary to strengthen MSP, including the development of the new tools and approaches. So it is important to remember that we can only plan and manage human activity in marine area, not marine ecosystems or components of ecosystems. So MSP is an international responsibility, but will be effective if it's concerning an overall ecosystem-based and integrated in many sectors and organizations, and also adaptive, which can have the ability to learn from experience. The other characteristic of an effective MSP is being strategic and anticipatory, to focus on long-term, and finally, participatory, to consider the other members of the process, such as stakeholders. MSP before and after plan implementation could prove extremely useful, not only to help in the stakeholder engagement process for the planning, but also allowing a social comparison and thereby social impact monitoring. Further, MSP would allow better understanding of the different perception of different actors from various levels from bottom to top, instead of only integrating selected opinions that were easy to obtain. MSP can prove highly valuable and improving the domains of the social dimension framework as social equity, social sustainability, and ethics in MSP. Evaluating MSP outcomes in the explicit context of enable and disable conditions can stimulate discussion around what works in MSP, encourage new adaptive strategies, and provide a path forward for MSP to more fully meet its potential to radically shift ocean governance in direction that truly benefits people and nature. So during this panel, the speakers highlight message and recommendations. To summarize, these are three key messages from my report. The first one is that in order to strengthen MSP, natural scientific knowledge is necessary. Therefore, we need to invest more and more in research and education, as this is the appropriate place where we produce scientific knowledge. The second key message is that ocean observations, including physics, biochemistry, biology, and ecosystems, are crucial to understand the complex oceanic environment, providing data, products, and services. Therefore, we need data development. We need also harmonizations, MSP, and the replicability of analysis and evaluating the monitoring and assessment of MSP. And finally, the third and last message is that there is a strong need to incorporate social science and the humanities knowledge in MSP, including indigenous knowledge as culture, values, sea change. And also we need to use scenarios in MSP to describe the possible and alternative future operating environments. Thank you very much.
Thank you for summing up such technical set of presentations and a very rich wealth of information that we heard from all of our speakers. I would like to thank each and every one of the speakers, especially Dan for staying up the other side of the planet tonight with us, today with us. And I would like to ask you to all join me in giving a very, very warm applause to all of our speakers. And also to Catriona and Karima for facilitating and helping with this session. The next session we have will be the fourth session under the title of Capacity Development and Awareness, which will start at precisely 2 o'clock. And I would like to invite again the speakers to be with me just a little bit before 2 o'clock. Before that, we have now our lunch break, so you're free to make your own arrangements, go for lunch, enjoy it, take a rest, and then we'll see you back here at 2 o'clock sharp. Thank you very much.